Hello and welcome to the HumbleBrag podcast. I'm your host, Nate Mendel. The title of today's episode is The Human Crush That Devastated Israel. It is a very unfortunate topic indeed, but it is a topic that needs to be discussed. I'm sure you've heard, but if you haven't, there has been a human crush or a stampede that occurred on April 30th in Mount Meron, which is up north in Israel, during the religious celebration of Lag BaOmer. I happen to have been in Meron for the first time during this celebration, so I was there when this took place. Before we get into this topic, let's just take a moment to reflect on what it means that one day we're here, one day we're gone, and that we don't choose when we live, we don't choose when we die. Or from another perspective, you could say we only choose when we live, meaning while we're still alive and breathing, we could choose to live and be alive, but we don't choose when we die. One day we're here, one day we're gone. There is a higher authority or variables outside of our understanding that determines when we come and when we go. So while we are here, to try to make the best of it. As a religious person myself, I'm not a huge fan of trivializing or rationalizing devastation or tragedy. I tend to take the more simple approach, and that is that I have emunah. I believe that everything that happens, God does, and He does for a reason. He does for our ultimate good. If we saw the truth, if we saw the bigger picture, we would understand why things happen. But being that I believe in those principles, I don't go much further than that. I don't try to create reasons or rationalize why something like this could happen or would happen and what I'm supposed to necessarily learn out of it or glean out of it. It's a very Jewish thing to do. You start pulling up references and parshas and learning lessons from these things. Tragedies are very difficult. Whether you believe that there's an ultimate authority, whether you believe that there's a reason behind it, a spiritual reason behind it or not, either way you have to deal with the pain of loss, the heartbreak of tragedy, right? So whether you believe, whether you're religious or not, and you believe that there's purpose behind things that happen in this world, or whether you just think that it's cause and effect, human error, you still have to come to terms with the heartbreak, with the pain of loss, damage, and tragedy. And being that that is the case, I don't see much purpose in rationalizing things or coming up with reasons to help us feel better about it. The fact is, it hurts, it's a tragedy, and it's something we have to deal with. It's something we have to work through. With that being said, this was an absolutely painful and devastating tragedy. There's no way to make light of it. Within a matter of seconds, minutes, 45 people died, 150 plus injured. It's unthinkable. So just a week or two ago, I didn't even know of such a thing as a stampede, as a crush. And when this happened, it kind of threw me into a little bit of research. I'm like, I have to understand what happened here. And it turns out that this is nothing new. And this is part of what is so unfortunate about it, is that it's not a new phenomenon. This has happened and unfortunately will continue to happen. And that is part of what is so unfortunate. It's one thing if this is like the first time in history something like this occurred, but no, this isn't. And this is what we're going to talk about to help get some more information on this topic in general so that we could potentially protect ourselves or prevent this from happening in the future, at least locally, to the best of our ability. So first things first, we have to deal with some of the semantics, some of the terminology that surrounds it, because I learned really quickly when doing some research that there's semantic games going on, and on the one hand, you could say, forget about the semantics of it. The world refers to it, or the media refers to it as stampede, and let's just run with that. But from the other hand, if we do just run with that, it gives the wrong connotation. So there is, I think, some purpose in understanding the difference in some of the terminology here. The news and media outlets call these things stampedes, and there's some nuance there that doesn't make it quite accurate. The actual thing that's taking place is a crush, a human crush. People are being crushed. I'll read some of the description straight off of Wikipedia. So it's not even my own words. Let's see how they explain it so we have some clarity on the difference between stampedes and a crush. They say human stampedes and crushes. Crushes often occur during religious pilgrimages and large entertainment events, as they tend to involve dense crowds with people closely surrounded on all sides. Human stampedes and crushes also occur in episodes of panic, e.g., in response to a fire or explosion as people try to get away. Stampedes. According to experts, true stampedes and panics rarely occur except when many people are fleeing in fear, such as from a fire, and trampling by people in such stampede conditions rarely causes fatal injuries. So that was a stampede. Now, crushes are often referred to as stampedes, but unlike true stampedes, they can cause many deaths. Crowd density is more important than size. A density of 4 people per square meter begins to be dangerous, even if the crowd is not very large. Academic experts who study crowd movements and crushing disasters oppose the use of the term stampede. The rhetoric of stampede is often used to imply that the crowd is animalistic or mindless. Most reported stampedes are better understood as progressive crowd collapses, beginning at densities of about 6 or 7 people per square meter. Individuals are pressed so closely against each other, they are unable to move as individuals. And shock waves can travel through a crowd, which at such densities behaves somewhat like a fluid. If a single person falls, or other people reach down to help, waves of bodies can be involuntarily precipitated into that open space. So because it's so dense, there's no vacuum. As soon as you fall down, the space that is then above you becomes open space and it gets filled by people. One such shockwave can create other openings in the crowd nearby, precipitating further crushing. So it kind of becomes like a ripple effect. If one person falls, that space gets filled by somebody that falls over or leans in, and then that space gets filled, and it compounds on itself. Unable to draw breath, individuals in a crowd can also be crushed while standing. Journalistic misuse of the term stampede, says Edwin Galley of the University of Greenwich, probably didn't pronounce his name correctly, but whatever, is the result of pure ignorance and laziness, right? So he's kind of calling out the way that journalists and media use the word stampede. It gives the impression, because when they use this term, it gives the impression that it was a mindless crowd only caring about themselves, and they were prepared to crush people. In reality, individuals are directly crushed by others nearby who have no choice, and those who can choose are too distant from the epicenter to be aware of what is happening. This is why the semantics matters a little bit. Storytelling is a huge part of our life, and the way that things are relayed by media, news outlets, has a lot to do with how it impacts us and how it makes us feel. So when you hear stampede, it sounds like, oh my God, they did something wrong. The crowd was stupid, mindless, not caring, animalistic. They don't actually have a choice. They're just an innocent crowd, and I'll get into that because I was in that crowd. Among causes of fatal crushes, sometimes described as crazes, is when a large crowd is trying to get towards something, typically occurring when members at the back of a large crowd continue pushing forward, not knowing that those at the front are being crushed, or because of something that forces them to move. A common aftermath of a crush with serious consequences is that those responsible for the event where the crush took place, authorities such as government bodies and news media, blame the crowd and the victim for being out of control and causing the crush, sometimes to the extent of a full cover-up. Later analysis, sometimes after those actually responsible have retired, may show that the disaster was largely caused in the moral and legal, rather than physical sense, by actions of those planning or in authority of the event. As in the Hillsborough disaster, which killed 96 football spectators, actions by the crowd were blamed until investigators 2 decades later found manifold errors by those responsible for organizing and controlling the football event, with members of the crowd then being regarded as hapless victims. So basically, it's very common for news outlets to portray a certain story. It essentially puts blame on the victims and those involved in it. But the professionals who actually understand this phenomenon and look into it, or if you really do a proper investigation, you see that it has really nothing to do with the people involved in it. It has more to do with the organization, the lack of organization behind it. So under prevention, it says it is believed that most major crowd disasters can be prevented by simple crowd management strategies. Human stampedes can be prevented by organization and traffic control, such as barriers. On the other hand, barriers in some cases may funnel the crowd towards an already packed area, such as in the Hillsborough disaster. Hence, barriers can be a solution in preventing or a key factor in causing a crush. One problem is lack of feedback from people being crushed to the crowd pressing behind. Feedback can be instead provided by police, organizers, or other observers, particularly raised observers, such as on platforms or horseback, who can survey the crowd and use loudspeakers to communicate direct the crowd. There is a risk of a crush when crowd density exceeds about 4 people per square meter. For a person in a crowd, a signal of danger and a warning to get out of the crowd if possible is the sensation of being touched on all 4 sides. A later, more serious warning is when one feels shockwaves traveling through the crowd, due to people at the back pushing forward against people at the front with nowhere to go. Keith Still of the Fire Safety Engineering Group, University of Greenwich, said, "Be aware of your surroundings. Look ahead. Listen to the crowd noise. If you start finding yourself in a crowd, surge. Wait for the surge to come. Go with it and move sideways. Keep moving with it and sideways, with it and sideways." After the 1883 crush known as the Victoria Hall disaster, which killed 183 children, a law was passed in England which required all public entertainment venues to be equipped with doors that open outwards. You know those push doors that we see all over the place? That was actually instituted after that disaster. We're going to talk about that disaster in a minute. For example, using crash bar latches that open when pushed. Crash bars are required by various building codes. So there are actual events that have taken place like that one that have instituted code in building because it's so serious. So here we see a little bit about the semantics behind it. That's why if you care about semantics, you might not want to call it a stampede. You may just want to call it a human crush or a crush. If you're not, so concerned with the semantics of it, at least understand that sometimes when the media uses that phrase, the connotation behind it is incorrect. So this is a very serious phenomenon, And there are a list of human crushes that have happened the ones that we know about in the past 200 years, very serious ones and significant ones. And this is what's part of what's so mind-blowing about it, is that if we know this happens in crowds, how can something like this happen in 2021? This isn't a new thing. It's new to me, but I have nothing to do with organization and crowd management. I was just a guest, if you will, like everyone else. So I wouldn't know something like this. But people organizing large crowds, I imagine, do know stuff like this. There are some stuff that are very, very famous. Like, for example, if I go down this list, let me just run through the list just so you understand a little bit how devastating these stuff are. February 11th, 1823, Carnival Tragedy of 1823, where about 110 boys died after falling down a flight of steps to get bread. June 16, 1883, Victoria Hall disaster. That's where the 183 children died rushing to get treats behind a narrow door at the end of a downward staircase. There was some marketing strategy that was being pulled off, and they were going to give kids free treats. And this shows that it doesn't even have to be adults. It doesn't matter the size of the bodies. Humans are very heavy. And even children, I guess thousands of kids, went running to get the candy and started piling up on each other. 183 kids died. That was in 1883. May 18th, 1896, Kodinka tragedy, where 1,389 people died and over 1,300 were injured. There's the December 24, 1913 Italian hall disaster. 73 people died trying to escape from a false fire alarm at a crowded Christmas party. That one's also very famous. That one I believe I've heard growing up. Somebody ran in and yelled, "Fire!" and the crowd started running towards the exit. Now, I believe that it was either this one or a different one, where they ran towards the exit and the doors were closed and they couldn't get the crowd back up enough to open the doors. And that pressure. I always knew that. I heard that growing up, so I always had it in mind, in my subconscious, in crowds, stuff like that can happen. Again, push bar. Push bar is supposed to solve that. And doors that swing out, not in. There's different code that's supposed to prevent stuff like this from happening. But outside of that, I never really heard about stampedes or crushes, certainly not crushes. Stampedes, we hear about stampedes because of livestock. There are livestock stampedes, but not crushes. But as explained above, stampedes is not very likely to kill people. The idea of being stepped on or trampled can, but doesn't kill a lot of people. People are not evil. You're not going to deliberately step on someone, even if you're trying to save yourself. A crush is very, very different. You're in a crowd that is trying to get somewhere. And sometimes it's portrayed as if they're trying to get to something, or trying to get into something. Often you're trying to get out. If you're at an event and there's a celebrity and you're trying to get to the celebrity, you could experience a human crush, people trying to get to the celebrity. If the subway pulls up, people are trying to push into the subway, into the train. You could experience that. Oftentimes, as I experienced in Meron this year, the tightest space I got into being crushed like that, not to the extent of anyone getting hurt, but was actually trying to leave. It wasn't even near where the fire was. It was just on an outer road. There were so many people at a certain area where the screens were showing on the side of the road. So a lot of people were stopping and watching. Other people are trying to get by. And it was going nowhere. It was just a road towards the exit. Some people were just leaving, some were coming. And for about 60 to 90 seconds, you're like this. And, you're like fluid. You're just bobbling along with everyone trying to get through. I lifted my hands up naturally, but I learned by researching this that that's actually one of the stuff you should do. I didn't know that, but I guess I just did that naturally because I don't feel comfortable standing in a very dense crowd with my hands down where people are pushing up against your chest, sides. A natural reaction for me was to kind of hold my hands up. So I was kind of bobbling through the crowd like this, my hands up, protecting my chest. One of the videos I saw from an expert actually explains to do that. So if you are in a crowd, you want to get your hands in front of your chest because you want to create some space so your lungs could expand normally. Another trick he explained was that if you have a backpack, you should bring your backpack around to your front and wear it backwards. Have your backpack sit here. In the worst case scenario where people are already collapsing or you find yourself on the floor, right away to get into that fetal position, I think it's called, right, where your knees are up and your hands are down. Being crunched into that position, again, creates some space between your chest and the next person to allow you to breathe. Essentially what happens is, and this is so devastating, you get crushed, you suffocate. And to think that so many people could die so quickly from that, from unintentional behavior by a collective crowd, is mind-boggling. Right, so you had the Italian hall disaster, 73 people. Now there's a lot of them here, but I'll skip the small ones, but some of the bigger ones, Japanese bombing, China, 1941, 1,000 people. Joseph Stalin funeral, 100 people, 200 people, 96. Some of the bigger ones, like the more famous ones, were the Mecca tunnel tragedy in 1990. Mecca, where the Muslims get together for Ramadan maybe, not sure. But in 1990, 1,400 people died. And then they had another one further down the list, a more recent one in the 2000s, I believe. A lot more people died. Then there was also the Love Parade disaster. 500 people died. The Hajj Stampede, 2015. 2,177 people crushed to death in Saudi Arabia. And that was in 2005. Could you imagine? So this is what I'm saying. This is not new. Crowd management personnel know about these things, should know about these things. In 2020, 13 people died. 2020, 56 in Iran. So these are things that happen almost on a yearly basis. So unfortunate. There's one, and I'll warn you, this is like graphic. The Cambodian, I forgot what it was called, Cambodia. You can see it on YouTube. There's footage of it. There's actually there's multiple footage of different events that occurred, but there's two of them, one in Russia, I think, and one in Cambodia, where you literally see visually what it looks like when people get crushed together. It is graphic. I think the Cambodia one, 400-something people died. You see in the footage, people smashed together. They were trying to get over a bridge. Mainly kids, younger crowd. But you see people just mingled and mashed together. If you've ever seen on YouTube, the YouTube channel, Crush It, where they have the hydraulic press and they're crushing stuff. It's literally no different. Humans are heavy. We have heavy limbs. The body, depending on how old you are, anywhere between 100 and 200 pounds on average. What happens when you have thousands of bodies that compress together or start falling over each other? That is tens of thousands of pounds of pressure. You cannot move your limb out. So if you want to see how graphic it is, look up the Cambodia one on YouTube, or the Russia one, where you literally see a pile of bodies, and it takes them anywhere between 30 to 60 minutes, and this is all on footage, for hundreds of police officers and personnel trying to get them off. You see the bodies there. People are suffocating. Half of them are already dead. Half of them are suffocating. They're spraying water on them. They're so intermingled like this. They're trying to pull bodies out like this, and it just doesn't go. Tens of thousands of pounds of force. Horrible, unthinkable. And you can see it on live video. There's a pile of bodies, and just to undo that pile itself could take 30 minutes. So we wonder how so many people die so quickly. It happens like that. Large crowds are scary. They're dangerous. I never knew this to this extent. I've never been in such a large crowd. The largest crowd I've ever been in was probably in Uman, Ukraine for Rosh Hashanah, where you could have maybe up to 50,000 people. Maybe at a concert, but concerts are a little bit more organized and not condensed. So I'm used to a crowd maybe that big. And even Oman for me is a bit much. This, I went because I recently made an aliyah. And in the US, you hear about Meron, Lag BaOmer, so I always wanted to go and check it out. It's probably the biggest gathering of Jews in the world. And I flew in on Thursday from the US. Now that I'm a citizen, I could get in and out easily. And I drove straight up to Meron. That entire experience is overwhelming. If you're the type of person who has anxiety or claustrophobic, it could be a very overwhelming experience. I had to park in Tzfat, take a bus in, and even that, waiting by the bus station in Tzfat to get on a bus to Meron was already packed, way packed. You're standing in line, squeezing onto the bus pulls up, everybody's pushing, trying to get into the bus, right? So you're already in that mode. You haven't even gotten there yet, and there's tens of thousands of people pushing, trying to get in. This is already late. This could be 12 a.m. because this goes through the night. And then when you get there, you see right away what's going on. The main street, hundreds of thousands of people. They keep saying, the media saying tens of thousands of people. I know what tens of thousands of people look like. That's Oman. In any picture, any video frame at any given time, you could have 20, 30,000 people, and that's one frame in 1 square mile. Hundreds of thousands of people. I would guess probably between 500,000 and 1 million people. It's just too many people. I typically stay calm in these situations, even when I did find myself in that space where you're bobbling and being pressed, calming myself down. But I did find myself once or twice throughout the night having to tell myself, well, calm down, because you could start panicking very easily when you feel like you are in a sea of people and you can't get out. Wherever you look, there's people. It's this tight. You cannot move. So if you start panicking or getting anxiety, you're going to start hyperventilating. There's nothing anyone could do to help you. So you have to really, really stay calm. And this is one of the stuff that happens in an actual crush. It gets tighter and tighter. And these are all innocent people who are just trying to get through a hallway, trying to get from point A to point B. You're just part of the crowd. And typically it's not fatal because everyone's bobbling along. It just takes one person to trip and just continuous waves from behind trying to get through. They don't know what's going on in the front. And it just gets tighter and tighter. Then what happens is you start realizing, oh, I can't breathe. It's getting too tight. You start panicking. So people start pushing, right? What happens if you feel like you're going to start dying or suffocating? You're going to start pushing back. And this is how it essentially sparks in a certain sense some of the times where you're pushing and it creates a wave, and then other people are pushing back. So that's why you're rocking side to side, different people. But when it gets to that fatal density, it's horrible. One of the preventative measures, if you do find yourself in a big crowd, staying calm. People yell. First of all, yelling doesn't work. People can't hear when people yell because you're already in a big crowd that is so loud, and just hearing people yelling doesn't help. By yelling, you're using up a lot of oxygen. Stay calm. And like I said, protect the chest and all that stuff. It is unthinkable to comprehend how these things take place. You have a ton of people who are just there to celebrate, be happy, and be part of this experience. And without anyone intentionally hurting another person, dozens of people could lose their life in a second. And technically, it could be prevented by proper crowd management. When I was in the crowd, so I get there, I go all the way up the main hill, I go very close to where the bleachers are and the dancing. I even have pictures. I got in, I saw what was going on. I had to really push my way in to get there, and the whole 9 yards. It was too much. It was just too much for me. It wasn't enjoyable for me. So I started making my way back towards the exit. I'm like, it may have been an hour and a half into me arriving, and I'm like, nah, this, I got my fair share. I'm done. I'll probably never come back. This is way too many people for me. It's not calm. It's not enjoyable. It's just overwhelming. So I started heading back. And when I was more towards the entrance, hundreds of medics and emergency personnel were ripping in, and then there's a lot of rumors going around. Bridge fell, bleachers fell, there's all kinds of rumors that go around until the actual truth comes out, or the story is relayed properly. But finding out what actually occurred is a very disappointing feeling, because it could be prevented and it should be prevented. While I might not return to a place that's that crowded, many people will, and many people enjoy it, and you can't judge them for that. A lot of people enjoy large crowds, and there are many occasions where large crowds form. It could be a concert, and it could be in the subway, but it happens, and it will continue to happen. But very, very excessively large crowds can be managed better. And if that means instituting limitations on how many people could enter X amount area at a time, they have to do it. These tragedies are only as relevant, for lack of a better term, as we learn from them. If we don't learn anything or change anything from our previous behavior, there's almost no point. And this is not to diminish the lives lost or anything like that, but if something like this is going to happen again and then again, then we are essentially doing it to ourselves. Meron is a huge gathering. They've said that in previous years there have been even more people. I mean, some people said that this year was even bigger than previous. I don't know, but the point is it's hundreds of thousands of people every year. So if we don't see real change, then we are essentially doing it to ourselves. Seeing that crowd and doing some research into stampedes or crushes in general, I understand now that it isn't a matter of if it'll happen, it's a matter of when. If you have crowds of this size in these condensed spaces, it's not a matter of if it'll happen. I think it's a miracle that it hasn't happened in past years. It's a matter of when. It's a matter because it's just a matter of time before one person trips and then it compounds. The fact that it hadn't happened in the past 5, 10, 20 years is a miracle. And the fact that it did happen this year is, one way or another, just a consequence of us not making smarter decisions as humans, as organizers. I would think the people organizing an event like this would know that, would know about this phenomenon. Again, your average person going doesn't know about it. I was in the crowd. I didn't know anything about it. I was just there, part of the wave, part of the liquid. I even took video showing how we're just kind of bobbling along. If you want to see what that looks like, you go on YouTube. There's videos that show what that fluid looks like. Organizers should know this. It's 2021. This stuff happens almost every year in a different country. This has nothing to do with the people going. This has to do with the people organizing it. The government, the police. This is crowd management. So it's so unfortunate. But I think the bottom line is, do we learn from it and institute some changes that prevent such things from happening? On top of that, and there's no way to, feel good about any of this, is that we did lose a lot of lives. It was a tragedy, and there's no way to feel good about it. It's horrible. It's going to remain a horrible tragedy. And it's very unfortunate. Like I said, I don't like rationalizing. I think it's just a great reminder of what it means that life is so fickle that we don't choose when we come and when we go. We could be attending a celebration, and that's our last celebration we'll ever attend. And for the hundreds of thousands that were there and didn't fall and weren't part of that tunnel, that path, that little hallway when that took place, I thank God. I thank God. Thank you, Hashem. Finally, any indication that it is the crowd's fault in any shape or form, I think is false. And it stems from essentially ignorance, not understanding how these things take place. These things could take place in any type of scenario. Like I said, it could be in the subway, it could be at a concert, it could be anywhere, and it has less to do with the crowd and more to do with the organizers of the event, unfortunately. May those who have stepped into the next world rest in peace, close to the source, and the families find solace. Until next time, God bless.